Everybody thinks that the Chainsaw Man ending is a time loop, but it's really not. It's actually way simpler. Well, okay, I'm not gonna lie to you. It might not sound simple at first, but I'm going to break it down as clear as possible. And I think by the end, if you can understand and see things from my perspective, that we've done a good job. Because I think once you do, you're going to be like, oh, okay, some of that really does make sense now. So let's get into it. First of all, Pochita does not rewind time, he removes it. We already know he can erase concepts like nuclear weapons just by eating the devils tied to it. So if people fear time, aging, death, and the future, then what makes that any different from other devils? There's no reason he couldn't erase time too. So here's an easy way to understand this theory before we get into it. Imagine time is like a straw. And I know we're explaining one of the most confusing anime endings ever with a straw, but just trust me. Normally, time moves forward, but Pochita, he cuts out the middle completely and erases that part of time from existence. Then the two ends get pushed back together and time continues forward. And we know this works because the future devil still exists. There's literally a future devil. So when time gets cut, it doesn't just stop like cutting off a piece of the straw. The timeline has to reconnect and it keeps going. So he cuts out a middle of the straw and it pushes back together. You got that? Before we go any further, we need to label something clearly because if not, it will be confusing. There is only one timeline, but it has two different versions. We're going to have timeline 1 be the original timeline, and this is the timeline that we have never read except for the last chapter. Timeline 2 is the story we actually read up to the last chapter. And timeline 2 only exists because a part of timeline 1 was removed. You got that? Okay, let's break these two down. In timeline 1, Denji survives, he becomes a devil hunter, and he continues down that path long enough to become feared by the other devils. This fear eventually creates the Chainsaw Man devil. And in timeline 1, Pochita is not Denji's heart. He fully exists as the Chainsaw Man devil in hell. He never meets Denji. So he never experiences the love that he tells Denji he's never gotten. It makes complete sense. But in timeline number 1, he fights the four horsemen and he comes close to dying. So to survive, he does the only thing he can. He erases that moment from existence up until the point where the concept of Chainsaw Man started to begin. And that is the day that Denji ended up fighting the Yukaza zombies. So that's the first reset. He erases the point from when Denji starts to fight the zombies up until the point where he starts to lose with the four horsemen. Okay, so now with timeline 1, we move into timeline 2, which is the story we actually read. So in timeline 2, everything changes. Instead of being born in hell, Pochita meets Denji for the first time early, and he becomes his heart. So they aren't reconnecting, they're meeting for the very first time. And this also explains why Pochita never felt that love before, because in timeline 1, he never had that chance. Now, Denji surviving without a normal heart isn't as strange as it sounds, because in timeline 1, the simplest explanation is that as a devil hunter, he eventually reaches supernatural solutions, most likely through the pact we see him make with power. But as we said in timeline 2, Pochita replaces his heart, so we don't have to worry about that. In timeline 2, we watch all of the events take place, or we read them in the manga, however you consume this. In timeline 2, that is what we have been watching. At the end of timeline 2, we see that Pochita eats himself. But he doesn't just eat himself, he removes that part of time again. So things bounce back to the day Denji is in the shack about to go fight the zombies again. But this time, because Pochita ate himself, he has removed himself too. Nobody remembers who he is because he deleted himself along with that time gap from existence. So when the timelines reconnect again, there's no Chainsaw Man devil to remember. Now let's look at some examples of other devils that help solidify this theory. Devils lose their memories when they die and are reincarnated. This is why Makima comes back as Nayuta with no memory of her past life. But the devils who don't die still remember Chainsaw Man. The difference is how they remember. The four horsemen remember the fight, but it's blurry. They know it happened, but they don't remember how it ended. Other devils, like Beam, still recognize Chainsaw Man clearly, but they don't even realize that time was cut at all. So it's not that memory is random, it's that time itself is missing and everyone is remembering around this gap. This also explains Makima and Nayuta really well. Makima dies and is reborn as Nayuta before Pochita eats himself and resets time. So when the timeline reconnects earlier, she doesn't turn back into Makima, she stays Nayuta because devils don't rewind like that. They're reincarnated and they most likely grow into older versions of themselves. So in timeline number 1, which is the timeline that we see in the final chapter, she is going to grow again in that timeline and eventually become Makima again. So Makima is in just as much of a loop as everybody else. She starts as the Makima we know in the second timeline. She gets eaten and reborn, still in the second timeline. Then at the end, Pochita erases time and himself again. Then, because of that, it transitions back into the first timeline. Nayuta was still a child when this happened, so she remains a child when the two timelines come back together again. This can also explain things like power being different. I don't think that's the same Power that we've seen in the manga that we've been reading. I think Power reincarnated into a very similar version of herself, but it's not the same one we see. And that's why some of her actions and things that she likes are completely different, because that's a different Power. And when the timelines reconnected, the power from that timeline transitioned back. That's why the Power we see is different. And I think Power dies in every timeline. So every time the timeline resets, Power is a different version of herself, back and forth and back and forth. So everything is looping, but it's not looping in a circle, it's looping in a straight line. There's just parts that continuously be cut out and stitched back together again. And so the reason that Pochita does this in the second timeline is because he thinks that Denji will never be fully satisfied. Every time he gets what he wants, it isn't enough, which is unfortunately very relatable to me. But at the same time, it means that he will never reach his dreams. Pochita realizes that he gets whatever he has always wanted, which is love. But Denji never gets what he actually needs, which is true happiness. So instead of choosing himself, Pochita chooses Denji. He erases himself, he removes the timeline and his own existence along with it, sending the world back to before they ever met just to give Denji another chance at a better life, even if it means he's forgotten. But what he doesn't realize is every time he does this, he is setting the loop in motion again. So, as kind hearted as Pochita is being, he's a part of the reason that Denji really never reaches that happiness. And it's sad to look at it in that way because Pochita needs Denji for love and Denji needs Pochita for happiness, but Pochita thinks he's never going to get it. So he removes himself from the equation just to be reborn in hell again and to repeat the cycle. So, as long as Denji survives, keeps hunting devils, and becomes feared enough, the idea of Chainsaw Man will always be created again. It's not just a broken ending, it's one timeline being broken apart over and over again by a devil who loves Denji enough to try and give him second chances. So if you enjoyed this, please know we are a new YouTube channel. Any growth is appreciated. If you could subscribe, leave a like, or even just a comment, it helps out tremendously. At 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to do a giveaway, and I think that's the best time to do it because it's still personal with you guys and I want to be able to connect with the fans on that level. So please join the family, have fun, take a seat, and I'm excited to bring some more videos out for you guys.